The afternoon sun beat down on Pinecrest Avenue as Dr. Keisha Washington drove home after a 12-hour shift at Memorial Hospital. Her mind drifted between thoughts of a hot shower and the leftover pasta waiting in her fridge. The day had been long but rewarding. She'd successfully completed 2 surgeries and delivered good news to anxious families. A smile touched her lips as she recalled the relief on their faces. The wail of a police siren cut through her thoughts. Blue and red lights flashed in her rearview mirror. "What now?" she whispered, checking her speedometer. She'd been driving exactly at the limit. Her inspection sticker was current. Her tags were up to date. Still, she felt that familiar knot form in her stomach as she guided her silver sedan to the side of the road. Keisha took a deep breath and placed her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, a habit her father had drilled into her since she first got her license. When you get pulled over, keep your hands visible. Move slowly. Say yes, sir, and no, sir. Don't argue even if you're right. Through her side mirror, she watched Officer James Miller step out of his patrol car. He walked with stiff shoulders and a hand resting near his holster. Something about his approach made the knot in her stomach tighten. Keisha cracked her window just enough to hear him. "License and registration," Officer Miller demanded, not bothering with a greeting. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but the tight line of his mouth suggested he was in no mood for questions. "May I ask why I was pulled over, officer?" Keisha asked, her voice steady despite the nervousness climbing up her throat. Officer Miller's jaw clenched. "License and registration first, ma'am." "I'd like to know why I'm being stopped," Keisha insisted gently. She wasn't being difficult. She genuinely wanted to understand what rule she might have broken. "Step out of the vehicle," Officer Miller ordered, his tone hardening. "Officer, I don't understand what—" "Step out of the vehicle now." His voice rose, echoing down the quiet suburban street. Keisha felt her heart hammering in her chest. This wasn't right. She hadn't done anything wrong. "Sir, I'd like to call my lawyer before—" "I said get out." "My license and registration are in the glove compartment," Keisha explained, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'm going to reach for them now, okay?" Without waiting for his response, she slowly moved her right hand toward the glove compartment. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Officer Miller's face darkened. "Stop moving," he shouted, but Keisha had already popped open the glove compartment. In a flash, the officer drew his baton and swung it at her driver's side window. The sound of shattering glass filled Keisha's ears as tiny shards rained down on her lap, her shoulders, her hair. She froze, unable to process what had just happened. The window that had been intact seconds ago was now a gaping hole with jagged edges. "Hands where I can see them," Officer Miller shouted, his baton still raised. "Now!" Keisha lifted her trembling hands, bits of glass falling from her sleeves. A small cut on her cheek stung, but the shock numbed most of the pain. Her medical training kicked in, cataloging her condition. Elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, likely entering a stress response. No serious injuries yet, but the situation was far from over. The street had gone eerily quiet. A jogger across the road had stopped in her tracks. An older man walking his dog stood motionless on the sidewalk. Everyone was watching, but no one intervened. "Please," Keisha managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm a doctor at Memorial." "I was just reaching for my ID." Officer Miller didn't lower his baton. Slow movements. "Touch anything suspicious and this gets worse." The threat hung in the air between them. Keisha couldn't believe this was happening in her own neighborhood, less than 2 miles from the house she'd owned for 5 years. The house with the garden she'd planted last spring. The house where she hosted dinner parties for her colleagues and Sunday brunches for her parents. With excruciating slowness, she reached toward the glove compartment again. Her fingers closed around her wallet and vehicle registration. As she withdrew them, a photo slipped out. Keisha in her white coat, smiling beside a group of children at the hospital's pediatric ward. She handed the documents through the broken window, glass crunching beneath her as she shifted in her seat. Her hospital ID badge was clipped to her wallet, its lanyard dangling as Officer Miller snatched it from her hand. "Dr. Keisha Washington," he read aloud, looking from the ID to her face and back again. "You work at Memorial?" "Yes," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I'm the head of cardiothoracic surgery." Officer Miller studied her license. The afternoon had grown quiet except for the occasional passing car slowing down to stare at the scene. A police officer standing over a broken car window. A well-dressed black woman sitting perfectly still inside. Keisha's thoughts raced. She needed to document this. She needed witnesses. She needed to call someone. But she didn't dare move to reach for her phone. There was a report, Officer Miller finally said, his voice slightly less harsh, of a stolen vehicle matching this description. Driver was described as armed and dangerous. Keisha blinked in disbelief. And you thought that was me?
In my work clothes?
After my shift at the hospital. For the first time, Officer Miller seemed to really look at her, not as a threat but as a person. He noticed her neat blouse now dusted with glass, the stethoscope peeking out of her bag on the passenger seat, the hospital parking permit on her windshield. The report didn't specify it, he began. Didn't specify what? Keisha interrupted, finding her courage as the shock began to give way to anger. That the suspect wasn't a medical professional driving home from work? Or just that they didn't specify I'd be black? Officer Miller's mouth opened, then closed. He removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were now uncertain, maybe even embarrassed. From his patrol car, the radio crackled to life. Suspect vehicle located on Westmore Road. Green sedan, license plate TEP 9730. Approach with caution. The color drained from Officer Miller's face. Keisha's car was silver. Her license plate began with LDR. He'd pulled over the wrong car. He'd broken the window of the wrong car. And now as he looked at the documentation in his hand and the woman covered in glass before him, another realization seemed to dawn on him. Dr. Washington, he said, his voice notably different now. You need to step back from my vehicle, Keisha said firmly. Despite the glass on her clothes and the cut on her cheek, she suddenly felt powerful. She was right. He was wrong, and they both knew it. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, she continued, her years of commanding operating rooms giving strength to her voice. I want your name, your badge number, and your supervisor's contact information. Now. Officer Miller looked down at the ID in his hand again, and something changed in his expression. Recognition flickered across his features, not just of his mistake, but something deeper, more personal. Your name, Keisha repeated. Badge number. James Miller, he replied automatically. Badge 4731. He stared at her hospital ID again, then at her face. The arrogance that had surrounded him when he first approached her car had evaporated. Now he looked almost stricken. Dr. Washington, he said again, softer this time. You work in cardiothoracic surgery at Memorial? Yes, she answered, unsure why he was fixating on this detail. Officer Miller swallowed hard. He glanced around, suddenly aware of the small crowd of onlookers that had gathered. A woman was filming with her phone. Someone had called out that they were a witness. Could you? His voice faltered. Could you step out of the car, please? There's glass everywhere. You might get hurt. The irony of his concern now after he'd been the one to break her window wasn't lost on Keisha, but there was something in his changed demeanor that made her curious. Carefully, she opened her door and stepped out, brushing glass from her clothes. 3 months ago, Officer Miller said, his voice barely audible. Did you perform emergency surgery on a teenage girl? Car accident victim. Her name was... Keisha felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the afternoon breeze. Memory flashed through her mind. A 16-year-old girl, critical condition, parents sobbing in the waiting room. A police officer pacing the halls, still in uniform, refusing to go home even after his shift ended. She looked at Officer Miller's face again, this time with new understanding. The world around them seemed to slow, the background noise fading as a moment of recognition passed between them. This was the moment everything changed. For both of them. Officer Miller stood frozen, his eyes fixed on Keisha's hospital ID badge. The tough, commanding presence he'd shown minutes earlier had crumbled away, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. It was you, he whispered. You're the doctor who saved my daughter. Keisha's mind raced back through her recent surgeries. Memorial Hospital saw hundreds of patients each week, but emergency cases, those stood out, especially the ones involving children. Lisa, she said softly. Lisa Miller, 16 years old. Multiple traumatic injuries from a head-on collision. Officer Miller's eyes widened. Yes, that's my daughter. The crowd of onlookers continued to grow. A woman approached cautiously, her phone still recording. Is everything okay here? She asked. directing her question to Keisha. No, Keisha replied honestly, glass still clinging to her clothes. Everything is not okay. Officer Miller seemed to suddenly remember where they were, on a public street surrounded by witnesses, with Keisha's car window shattered around them. His face flushed with shame. I made a terrible mistake, he said, his voice breaking. He looked around at the broken glass scattered across the asphalt. I don't know what to say. Keisha felt her anger colliding with confusion. This man had terrified her, destroyed her property, possibly put her life in danger. Yet now he stood before her, recognition dawning in his eyes, his authority melting into regret. Your daughter, Keisha said, finding her professional voice. How is she doing? Officer Miller blinked, caught off guard by the question. She's good. Back in school. Playing violin again. The doctor said she might never, his voice caught. You said she would recover. You were right. A police cruiser pulled up behind Officer Miller's car, its lights flashing but sirens silent. An older officer stepped out, taking in the scene with a practiced eye. Miller, what's going on here? He called out, walking toward them. Officer Miller turned, straightening his posture slightly. Sergeant Powell, I made a mistake. He glanced back at Keisha's shattered window, then down at the glass covering the street. I need to report an incident. Sergeant Powell approached, his expression grim as he surveyed the damage. Ma'am, are you injured?
Minor cuts, Keisha answered automatically, her doctor's training kicking in.
She touched the small cut on her cheek. Nothing serious. She's Dr. Washington, Officer Miller said quickly. From Memorial. The surgeon who saved Lisa after the accident. Something shifted in Sergeant Powell's expression. Recognition, then surprise. Dr. Washington? Tom's daughter? Keisha nodded. Yes, my father was on the force for 30 years. The revelation hung in the air between them. Keisha was not just any civilian. She was the daughter of a respected former officer, and the surgeon who had saved Miller's daughter. The dynamics of the situation had completely transformed in the span of minutes. I want to file a formal complaint, Keisha said firmly. Despite the connections being revealed, she wasn't going to let this incident slide. And I want it documented that Officer Miller broke my window without provocation or just cause. Sergeant Powell nodded grimly. Understood, Doctor. We'll need your statement. He turned to Miller. And yours. Complete incident report now. Officer Miller nodded, his face a mask of misery. But instead of moving toward his patrol car to get forms, he suddenly dropped to one knee on the glass-strewn pavement. Dr. Washington, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I can't undo what I just did. But you have to know. He paused, struggling to find words. When Lisa was brought in, the other doctors said she wouldn't make it through the night. You stayed with her for 16 hours straight. You called me personally after the surgery. Keisha remembered that call. The worried father who couldn't stop asking questions. Desperate for reassurance, she'd spent nearly 40 minutes on the phone with him, explaining every detail of his daughter's condition and treatment plan. You told me to have hope, Officer Miller continued, still kneeling. You said she was fighting hard and that you wouldn't give up on her. Around them, the crowd had grown quiet. Even the woman recording had lowered her phone slightly, caught up in the unfolding scene. Get up, Officer Miller, Keisha said, uncomfortable with his position. This doesn't change what happened here. I know it doesn't, he replied, but remained kneeling. Nothing changes it. I saw a black woman in a nice car and I made assumptions. I escalated a routine stop into this. He gestured at the shattered glass. And the worst part is I didn't even recognize you. You saved my child's life and I still... He couldn't finish the sentence. Sergeant Powell stepped closer. Miller, on your feet. This isn't the place, but Officer Miller shook his head. Dr. Washington, I'm begging you, not for forgiveness because I don't deserve that, but for a chance to make this right somehow. Keisha felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The professional part of her, the surgeon who made life or death decisions daily, wanted to remain detached and clinical. File the report, let the system handle it. But another part of her saw something unexpected happening. A man confronting his own biases in real time, broken open by the realization of what he'd done. Stand up, she said again, more gently this time. We need to get out of the street. Officer Miller finally rose, glass crunching under his boots. His face was flushed with shame and his eyes were red-rimmed. I'll pay for the damage myself, he said, Not the department, me. And whatever else you need, what I need, Keisha interrupted, is for this to never happen to anyone else. She looked from Miller to Sergeant Powell. How many other windows have been broken? How many people haven't been lucky enough to have saved an officer's daughter? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and demanding. We should move your car, Dr. Washington, Sergeant Powell said after a moment. It's not safe to drive with the window like that. We can give you a ride home and have it towed to a repair shop. Keisha nodded, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of her 12-hour shift combined with the adrenaline crash from the incident. Her scrubs were still under her clothes. All she had wanted was to go home and rest. As if reading her thoughts, Officer Miller spoke up. My brother owns Glass Express on Maple Street. He can have someone here in 20 minutes with a temporary fix, enough to get the car home safely. Keisha considered her options. The practical solution would be to accept, rather than waiting for a tow. Make the call, she agreed. While Officer Miller stepped away to phone his brother, Sergeant Powell moved closer to Keisha. Your father was a good man, he said quietly. One of the best officers I ever worked with. He'd be proud of how you've handled yourself today. Keisha wasn't so sure. Her father had always taught her to respect police officers, but he'd also taught her to stand up for herself. Right now, those two lessons seemed to be in conflict. My dad taught me that a badge means responsibility, she replied. Not power. Sergeant Powell nodded, a hint of sadness in his eyes. He taught many of us the same. Some lessons don't stick as well as they should. Officer Miller returned, his call completed. Someone will be here in 15 minutes. I've also called my supervisor at the precinct. She's waiting for us whenever you're ready to file your report. Keisha looked at her watch. This was not how she had planned to spend her evening. But some things were too important to rush. I'll wait for the window repair, then follow you to the station, she decided. The crowd had begun to disperse, though a few neighbors lingered, watching the scene unfold. The woman who had been recording approached Keisha again. I have the whole thing on video, she said, from when he broke your window, if you need it for your complaint. Keisha thanked her and exchanged contact information. Evidence would be important if this went further, and she was beginning to think it should. As they waited for the glass repair person to arrive, Officer Miller kept his distance, standing by his patrol car with his head bowed. He looked nothing like the intimidating figure who had approached her car earlier. Now he just looked like a man drowning in regret. The repair van pulled up 15 minutes later. A middle-aged man hopped out, took one look at the situation, the police cars, the broken glass, Keisha's grim expression, and wisely focused solely on the technical aspects of the job. Temporary fix today, proper replacement tomorrow, he explained as he worked. This will get you home safely. While the window was being repaired, Keisha found herself standing near Officer Miller again. Lisa asked about you, he said quietly. After she was released, she wanted to thank the doctor who saved her life. Keisha nodded. Patients often feel that way. But I was just doing my job. Like I was supposed to be doing mine, Miller replied, the irony heavy in his voice. The difference is you did yours right. As the repair technician finished his work, Keisha felt a strange mix of emotions. The anger was still there, it would be for a long time. But something else was emerging too. A sense that this horrible moment might actually lead somewhere important. I'll see you at the station, she told Officer Miller as she got back into her car, now fitted with a temporary plastic window. I have a lot to say in my report. He nodded, accepting whatever was coming. I'll be there, he promised. And Dr. Washington? Thank you. Not just for Lisa, but for making me face what I did today. Some lessons come too late, but that doesn't mean they can't still matter. Keisha started her engine, wondering what her father would say about all this. As a black officer in a mostly white department, he'd navigated complexities she was only beginning to understand. Maybe this was a chance to continue his work in her own way. See you at the station, she repeated and pulled carefully away from the curb, leaving Officer Miller standing amid the remnants of glass that still glittered on the asphalt. Evidence of what had been broken, and perhaps of what might yet be rebuilt. The police station hummed with activity as Keisha followed Officer Miller through the front doors. Phones rang in the background. Officers moved between desks with coffee cups and file folders. A few glanced up as they entered, their expressions shifting when they noticed the dynamic between the two. Officer Miller's slumped shoulders and Keisha's determined stride. Dr. Washington? A voice called from across the room. A woman in her 50s with short gray hair and captain's bars on her uniform approached. I'm Captain Rivera. I understand there was an incident today involving Officer Miller. Keisha nodded. That's putting it mildly. Captain Rivera's gaze flicked to the small bandage Keisha had applied to her cheek in the car. Let's talk in my office. They followed her down a hallway lined with community service awards and framed photos of officers. Keisha noticed a familiar face in one of them, her father much younger receiving some kind of commendation. The sight of him strengthened her resolve. Captain Rivera's office was small but neat. She closed the door behind them and gestured to 2 chairs. I've received a preliminary report from Sergeant Powell, she began, taking her seat behind the desk. But I'd like to hear directly from both of you. Dr. Washington, would you start? Keisha recounted the events, the traffic stop, her request to know why she was pulled over, reaching for her registration, and Officer Miller's violent reaction. She described the shattered glass, the fear, and the shocking moment of recognition. Throughout her account, Officer Miller kept his eyes fixed on the floor, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. When she finished, Captain Rivera turned to him. Officer Miller? Your account. He cleared his throat, finally looking up. Everything Dr. Washington said is accurate. I received a call about a stolen vehicle, silver sedan. The report mentioned the suspect might be armed. When I saw Dr. Washington's car, I made assumptions. What assumptions? Captain Rivera pressed. Miller hesitated. I assumed she matched the description, but the actual alert specified a male suspect. And when she questioned why I pulled her over, he paused. I took it as defiance rather than a legitimate question. I escalated the situation unnecessarily. And the window? Captain Rivera asked. When she reached for the glove compartment, He struggled with the words. I overreacted. Completely overreacted. There was no weapon, no threat. Just a doctor trying to show me her ID. He looked directly at Keisha for the first time since they'd entered the station. I'm trained better than that. I know better than that. But in that moment I didn't see Dr. Washington. What did you see? Captain Rivera's voice was quiet but firm. Miller's face flushed. I saw a threat that wasn't there. The room fell silent. The unspoken truth hung in the air. That Officer Miller had seen a black person and immediately categorized them as dangerous, despite all evidence to the contrary. And after the window? Captain Rivera continued. I recognized Dr. Washington, Miller said, his voice steadier now. She saved my daughter's life 3 months ago. A car accident. Lisa was in critical condition. Dr. Washington performed emergency surgery. 16 hours. He looked at Keisha again. She called me personally after. Checked in every day during recovery. Captain Rivera leaned back in her chair, taking in this information. Dr. Washington, what would you like to see happen here? Keisha had been thinking about this question since the moment her window shattered. The easy answer would be to demand Officer Miller's badge, to call for him to be fired, to seek maximum consequences. Part of her wanted that, but another part, the surgeon who had seen too many lives lost to snap judgments, wondered if there might be a different path. I want accountability, she said finally. I want a formal record of what happened. I want compensation for the damage to my vehicle. She paused. But more than that, I want change. Real change. Not just for Officer Miller, but for the whole department. Captain Rivera nodded slowly. Go on. My father served on this force for 30 years, Keisha continued. He used to tell me stories about trying to change things from the inside. Small victories. Setbacks. The long, slow work of transformation. She straightened in her chair. I think this incident could be a catalyst. A case study for your training programs. A wake-up call. Officer Miller looked up, surprise evident on his face. You think I should keep my badge? He asked incredulously. I think taking your badge is the easy solution, Keisha replied. It makes everyone feel like the problem is solved. One bad officer removed, but the next Officer Miller is still out there, with the same biases, the same training gaps, the same potential to hurt someone who might not be so lucky. Captain Rivera studied Keisha with newfound respect. What exactly are you proposing, Doctor? A comprehensive review of your traffic stop protocols. Bias training led by community members, not just consultants. Body cameras with real accountability and, she looked directly at Officer Miller, community service. A lot of it. Starting with speaking to cadets about what happened today, Officer Miller swallowed hard. You want me to tell other officers about how I profiled you and broke your window? I want you to tell them about what happened after, Keisha corrected. About recognizing your mistake. About facing it head on instead of making excuses. That's the part most officers never get to. Captain Rivera leaned forward, resting her elbows on her desk. That's not the usual approach. I'm not interested in usual approaches, Keisha replied. I'm interested in approaches that work. A knock on the door interrupted them. Sergeant Powell entered, holding a tablet. Sorry to interrupt, Captain, but you should see this. He handed over the device. It's already got 10,000 views. Captain Rivera looked at the screen and her expression tightened. She turned the tablet around, showing a video titled, Cop Destroys Black Doctor's Window, Then Begs on His Knees When He Realizes Who She Is. The neighbor's video, Keisha realized. She posted it. The three of them watched in silence as the scene played out. Officer Miller breaking the window, the confrontation, the recognition, and finally, him kneeling on the glass-strewn pavement. Comments scrolled below, hundreds of them already, a mix of outrage and surprise at the unexpected turn the incident had taken. This changes things, Captain Rivera said, placing the tablet on her desk. The department will have to issue a statement. There will be media inquiries, community pressure. Good, Keisha said firmly. Use it. Show that you're taking this seriously. Not just damage control, but real reform. Officer Miller stared at the freeze frame on the tablet, himself on one knee looking up at Keisha. He trailed off. Broken open, Keisha finished for him. That's what needs to happen sometimes before healing can begin. Captain Rivera stood up, decision made. Dr. Washington, I'd like to work with you on a formal proposal for the changes you've suggested. Officer Miller will be placed on administrative duty pending review, and will organize a community forum to address this incident. She extended her hand. Your father would be proud of your approach here. Keisha shook her hand, feeling the weight of the moment. Let's see the results before we decide that. As they left the office, Officer Miller fell into step beside her. The hallway seemed longer now, the photos on the walls watching their progress. Why are you doing this? He asked quietly. You could have ended my career today. Most people would have. Keisha slowed her pace. When your daughter was in surgery, her heart stopped twice. We could have given up. Called time of death. But sometimes when something is broken, you have to believe it can be fixed. She looked at him. Even when all the evidence suggests otherwise. Miller stopped walking entirely, processing her words. I don't deserve a second chance. This isn't about what you deserve, Keisha replied. It's about what might actually create change. Firing you would be easier. Forcing you to face what happened, to talk about it, to help reform the system that shaped you, that's harder. For everyone. They reached the station's front entrance. Through the glass doors, Keisha could see news vans already assembling in the parking lot. Word had spread quickly. What happens now? Miller asked, eyeing the gathering media. Now comes the hard part, Keisha answered. Actually doing the work. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the woman who had recorded the video. I hope you don't mind that I posted it, the message read. People need to see what happened, Keisha typed back. No, they do need to see. All of it. As she stepped toward the doors, she felt something shifting inside her. The anger was still there, righteous and justified. But alongside it grew something else. A determination to transform this moment into movement. Her father had chipped away at the system for 3 decades. Perhaps she could continue that work in her own way. Dr. Washington, Officer Miller called after her. What should I say to them? He gestured toward the reporters outside. She turned back, her expression resolute. The truth. Start with the truth, and then keep going. The doors opened automatically as she approached, sunlight streaming in, cameras turning in her direction. The next chapter was about to begin, with all its complications and possibilities. Keisha straightened her shoulders and stepped forward, ready to speak her truth to anyone willing to listen. 2 weeks had passed since the incident. Keisha sat in her living room, cup of tea in hand, watching the morning news. Her face appeared on screen again, the 3rd time this week, as the anchor discussed the viral police encounter that's sparking nationwide conversation about bias in law enforcement. The doorbell rang. Keisha muted the TV and went to answer, already knowing who it would be. Morning, Dr. Washington, Officer Miller said when she opened the door. He stood on her porch in civilian clothes. jeans and a button-down shirt instead of his uniform. Behind him, his personal truck was parked at the curb, loaded with gardening supplies. Right on time, Keisha noted, stepping aside to let him in. This had become their Saturday routine. While Officer Miller remained on administrative duty during the department's review, he had taken Keisha's suggestion of community service to heart, starting with her own community. Today marked his third weekend working on the neighborhood garden project Keisha had started last year. "The seedlings arrived," he said, following her through the house to the kitchen, "and I picked up that soil you wanted." Keisha poured him a cup of coffee. An unexpected domesticity had developed between them. Not friendship exactly, but something complex built on shared purpose. "How was the panel yesterday?" she asked, referring to the community forum where Officer Miller had spoken about the incident. He took the coffee with a grateful nod. "Tough, a lot of anger in that room." He stared into his cup. "Justified anger. And how did you handle it?" "I listened," he said simply. "Didn't get defensive. Didn't make excuses." He looked up at her. "Just like you told me to." Keisha nodded, satisfied. In the days following their confrontation, she had given Officer Miller some hard truths about what real accountability looked like. No hero's redemption, no instant forgiveness, just the slow, grinding work of acknowledging harm and committing to change. "Lisa asked to come with me next time," he added. "To the community garden, I mean. If that's okay with you." The mention of his daughter still created a strange tangle of emotions for Keisha. The teenager whose life she had saved was now part of this unexpected story of reckoning and repair. "She's welcome," Keisha said. "We could use more young people involved." They finished their drinks in companionable silence before heading out to Keisha's backyard. What had once been an overgrown lot was now taking shape as a community garden, with raised beds and newly planted fruit trees. 3 neighbors were already there, tending to different sections. Dr. Washington called Mrs. Chen from the tomato bed, and Officer Miller. "Good morning." The neighbors had been skeptical when Officer Miller first showed up with tools and work gloves. But over the past 2 Saturdays, wariness had given way to cautious acceptance. They had all seen the video, of course. Everyone had. But they were also witnessing what came after, the hard, unglamorous work of making amends. As they unloaded supplies from Miller's truck, a police cruiser pulled up alongside. Sergeant Powell stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Morning, Dr. Washington," he called, approaching the garden fence. "Miller, what brings you here, Sergeant?" Keisha asked, wiping soil from her hands. "Updates," he replied. "Thought you'd want to know in person." He glanced at Miller. "The department's finished its review. New protocols for traffic stops go into effect Monday. Body cameras mandatory de-escalation training expanded." Keisha felt a flutter of surprise. That was faster than I expected. "Turns out going viral creates motivation for change," Sergeant Powell said with a hint of irony. "There's more. The Academy wants you both to address the new cadet class. Share your perspectives on the incident." Officer Miller looked at Keisha. "Both of us? Together?" "That's the idea," Powell confirmed. "Show them 2 sides of the same story. The mistake and the aftermath." The thought made Keisha uncomfortable. Standing before a room of police cadets, becoming the good victim who helped a cop see the error of his ways. It felt too neat, too much like an after-school special. "I'll think about it," she said carefully. Powell nodded, respecting her hesitation. "One more thing. Captain Rivera asked me to give you this." He handed her an envelope. "The department's official response to your complaint." Keisha took it, feeling its weight. "And Officer Miller's suspension is being lifted. He'll return to active duty, but with new assignment. Community liaison officer. No patrol duties for 6 months minimum." Miller's expression was unreadable. Community liaison? Working with neighborhood groups, schools, local businesses? Building relationships instead of just enforcing laws? Powell turned back to Keisha. "It was your suggestion, Dr. Washington, in your proposal," Keisha remembered. It had been one of many recommendations she'd included in the document she and Captain Rivera had drafted together. She hadn't expected it to be implemented so quickly. "There's a press conference Monday," Powell continued. "Captain wants both of you there if you're willing." After Powell left, Keisha and Officer Miller returned to their gardening work in silence. The news hung between them, shifting the landscape of their carefully negotiated relationship. "You don't have to do it," Miller said finally, breaking the quiet as they planted tomato seedlings. The cadet speech, the press conference. None of it. Keisha gently packed soil around a fragile plant. I know. They're trying to turn this into a neat little story, he continued. Black doctor forgives racist cop. Everyone learns a lesson. Roll credits. Keisha looked up, surprised by his bluntness. Is that what you think is happening here? Miller shook his head. No, what's happening here is messier, harder. He gestured around the garden. This isn't a photo op. He struggled to find the words. Reparation, Keisha supplied. Small personal reparation? Yeah, he nodded. And it's not done. Not by a long shot. They worked side by side for another hour, the physical labor filling the space where words failed. Keisha found herself watching Miller's movements, the careful way he handled the seedlings, the methodical rows he created. There was humility in his work now, a deliberateness that hadn't been there in the beginning. My daughter wants to be a doctor, he said suddenly, because of you. Not just the surgery, but everything after. She's been following the news. Keisha paused, trowel in hand. What does she think about all this? She's angry with me, he admitted. Disappointed, confused, all the things she should be. He dug another small hole for a seedling. But she also sees that I'm trying to face it, not hide from it or make excuses. A car slowed as it passed Keisha's house, the driver clearly recognizing them from the news. This happened often now. Curious looks, occasional shouts of encouragement or criticism. Their private reckoning had become public property. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if it hadn't been me, Keisha said quietly. If it had been someone else's window. Someone who didn't save your daughter. Miller stopped working. I think about that too. All the time. And I wouldn't be here planting tomatoes, he said honestly. I might not be wearing a badge anymore. Or maybe nothing would have happened at all. No video, no viral moment. He looked directly at her. No chance to confront what I did. Keisha nodded, acknowledging the truth of it. That's why I keep saying yes to these panels and interviews. Not to absolve you, but because people need to see that change is possible, even if it comes from the worst moments. Mrs. Chen approached with a tray of lemonade for the workers. As she handed glasses around, she said to Keisha, My grandson showed me an online poll about your story. What should happen to the officer? More than half said he should be fired. Miller accepted the lemonade with a tight smile. Can't say I blame them. The numbers are missing the point, Keisha replied, taking a long drink. Firing one officer doesn't fix a broken system. It just makes room for the next one. They broke for lunch around noon, gathering at the picnic table Keisha had set up near the garden. The neighbors brought dishes to share, a spontaneous community meal that had become part of their Saturday tradition. As they ate, Keisha's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Captain Rivera. Decision made. New training program approved. Need your input on curriculum. Another message followed. Also, national news wants interview. Both of you together. Thoughts? Keisha showed the messages to Miller. They really want to push this redemption narrative, he grimaced. It sells better than cop slowly works to become less biased while still battling ingrained prejudices. His self-awareness surprised a laugh out of Keisha. Not exactly a headline that fits on the screen. So what do we tell them? He asked. About the interview. Keisha considered the question. The easy answer would be no, to protect her privacy, to avoid becoming a symbol, to resist the neat packaging of a messy human story. But there was power in visibility too, power in showing a path forward, however imperfect. We tell them yes, she decided, but on our terms. No feel-good fairy tale, just the complicated truth. Miller nodded slowly. I can do complicated truth. As the meal continued around them, Keisha found herself watching this unlikely gathering. Neighbors who had become friends, a police officer planting gardens instead of writing tickets, a community healing itself one careful conversation at a time. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to erase what had happened that day on Pinecrest Avenue, but it was something real taking root, as tangible as the seedlings they'd planted, as fragile and as full of potential. 6 months had passed since the day Officer Miller shattered Keisha's car window. Fall had given way to winter, then spring, and now summer warmth filled the air again. The community garden flourished with vegetables, herbs, and flowers, transforming the once empty lot into a gathering place. Keisha stood at the edge of the garden, watching a group of teenagers plant new seedlings. Among them was Lisa Miller, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, carefully explaining to younger children how to handle the delicate plants. "She's good with them," Keisha observed as Officer Miller joined her. He nodded, pride evident in his expression. "She wants to volunteer at the hospital next year. Says she's interested in pediatrics now." Their relationship had evolved over the months, not quite friendship, but a partnership forged through shared purpose. The garden had been just the beginning. What followed was a series of community initiatives, speaking engagements, and difficult conversations that neither had anticipated on that fateful day. "Ready for today?" Keisha asked. Miller took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." Today marked the launch of the police department's new training program, one that Keisha had helped design and that Officer Miller would help implement. The first session would begin in 2 hours at the community center, with officers from across the district attending. Officer Miller called one of the young gardeners, a boy of about 10. "Come see how tall our sunflowers got." Miller excused himself to examine the sunflowers, kneeling beside the children with genuine interest. Keisha watched the interaction, noting how different he seemed from the rigid, threatening figure who had approached her car that day. The transformation wasn't magical or complete. There had been setbacks, moments of tension, times when old habits emerged. But the change was real. "Dr. Washington," Lisa said, approaching with dirt-smudged hands. "Dad said you're speaking at the training today." "That's right," Keisha confirmed. Nervous about it, to be honest. Lisa studied her with keen eyes that reminded Keisha of the teenager on her operating table months ago, fighting for life with the same determination she now brought to everything. "They need to hear it," Lisa said simply, "especially from you." The relationship between Keisha and Lisa had its own complexity. The surgeon who saved her life was now the same woman her father had wronged so publicly. In the beginning, Lisa had been withdrawn around Keisha, struggling to reconcile these realities. But over time, she had become one of the garden's most dedicated volunteers and an unexpected bridge between her father and the community. "Your incision healed well," Keisha noted, gesturing to the barely visible scar near Lisa's collarbone, a reminder of the surgery that had connected their lives. "Dad says I'm healing better than he is," Lisa replied with unexpected wisdom. Keisha smiled. Different kinds of healing happen at different rates. They walked together toward the garden entrance where Officer Miller was helping load supplies for the training session into Keisha's car. The broken window had long since been replaced, but sometimes Keisha still found herself hesitating before reaching toward her glove compartment, a small trauma response that lingered. "Dr. Washington," called Mrs. Chen from her porch across the street. "Channel 5 is here again." Sure enough, a news van had parked at the corner. A reporter and cameraman were setting up, clearly hoping to catch footage of Keisha and Officer Miller together. Still a compelling visual 6 months after their story had gone viral. "I'll handle it," Miller said with a sigh. This too had become routine, the occasional media presence, the requests for updates on their story, the pressure to package their complicated journey into sound bites. While Miller spoke with the reporters, keeping them at a respectful distance from the garden and the children, Keisha checked her phone. A text from Captain Rivera had arrived. "Training room full. Officers from 3 districts. Some resistance, but they're here. No surprise there." The new training program, focused on bias recognition, de-escalation, and community-centered policing, had faced pushback from the beginning. Some officers viewed it as an overreaction to a single incident. Others resented the implication that they needed to change their approach. But the department leadership had stood firm, backed by city officials who recognized the political value of being seen addressing police conduct issues. "All set," Miller reported when he returned. "Told them they could get footage of the training center, not the garden. Kids deserve privacy." Keisha nodded her appreciation. "We should head over. I want to review my talking points." As they drove to the community center, a comfortable silence settled between them. 6 months of working together had created a rhythm, an understanding that transcended the need for constant conversation. "I passed the sergeant's exam," Miller said finally, breaking the quiet. Keisha glanced at him in surprise. "You didn't tell me you were taking it." "Wasn't sure I should," he admitted. "Didn't know if moving up was the right move after everything. And now?" He looked out the window, watching the neighborhood pass by. Now I think maybe I can do more good with more responsibility. Affect more change from inside the system. He turned back to her. If that's okay with you. The question caught her off guard. Why would you need my permission? Because none of this would have happened without you, he said simply. The training program, the community liaison position, my whole recalibration. You could have just demanded my badge that day. Instead, you demanded something harder. Keisha considered his words as she parked outside the community center. It wasn't about what I demanded. It was about what was needed. She turned to face him. Congratulations, Sergeant Miller. Use the position well. Inside, the community center's main room had been transformed. Rows of chairs faced a small stage. Officers in uniform mingled with community members in civilian clothes, an intentional mixing that had been Keisha's suggestion. At the back, local officials and media representatives waited, ready to document this new chapter in the department's approach. Captain Rivera met them at the door. Full house, she confirmed. The chief's here too, and the mayor sent a representative. Political interest in their story had grown as the video continued to circulate and gain attention. What could have been a devastating PR disaster for the department had been carefully reshaped into a narrative of accountability and reform. Though, Keisha remained vigilant about keeping the reality messy and honest, resisting the temptation to smooth away the uncomfortable edges. As they prepared to begin, Keisha found herself alone with Officer Miller, now Sergeant Miller, in a quiet corner of the back hallway. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. Been meaning to give it to you for a while now. He handed her a small wooden box. Inside was a glass paperweight with a tiny seedling suspended inside clear resin. From the first day at the garden, he explained, I saved one of the seedlings. Had it preserved? He looked embarrassed suddenly. Sounds silly now that I'm saying it out loud. Keisha held the paperweight up to the light, watching how the seedling seemed to float in its perfect transparency. It's not silly, she said quietly. I want you to know, Miller continued, his voice low and serious, that I think about that day every time I put on the uniform. Every traffic stop, every interaction, I carry it with me. As you should, Keisha replied, not unkindly. Not as punishment, but as awareness. He nodded. The department wants to use our story as a success story. Look how we've changed. But we both know it's not that simple. No, Keisha agreed. One training program doesn't fix generations of bias. One garden doesn't heal a community's wounds. She placed the paperweight carefully in her purse. But they're not nothing either. A staff member appeared at the end of the hallway. Dr. Washington? Sergeant Miller? We're ready to begin. They walked together toward the main room, where people waited to hear them speak about an incident that had changed both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Remember when you told me to tell the truth and keep going? Miller asked as they approached the door. I remember. I'm still trying to do that, he said. Every day, Keisha nodded. Me too. They stepped into the room full of officers, community members, and officials. The conversations quieted as people noticed their arrival. Captain Rivera approached the microphone to introduce them, her voice formal but proud as she outlined the new training initiative. As Keisha prepared to tell her story once more, not as a neat parable of forgiveness, but as a complex testimony to harm, accountability, and the long road of repair, she caught sight of a familiar face in the back of the room. Her father had come, his presence a silent affirmation of her approach. She stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the sea of uniforms and civilian clothes, at the cameras and the officials, at Officer Miller standing respectfully to the side, at her father watching from the back. 6 months ago, she began, her voice clear and steady. A police officer broke my car window during a traffic stop. What broke that day was more than glass. But what's been built since then might just be stronger. The room fell completely silent, everyone leaning forward to hear the story they thought they already knew. Ready, perhaps, to discover they didn't know it at all.